March 2020, COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization. Offices shut, travel slowed down, the world moved inside. But development doesn't stop. As the world changed around us, the global development industry rapidly adapted to the new normal. From overcoming global supply chain disruptions to increasing access to remote learning, from jump-starting digital solutions to finding new ways to connect with the communities where we work. The cooperative, innovative, and resilient spirit of the global development industry ensures the progress, safety, and well-being of our global community. In challenging times, development works because we work together.
The future is coming, and it's coming at us faster than ever. The world is facing massive shifts, demographically, economically, politically. Shifts that are being amplified by the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and transforming life as we know it. Technologies are rising and converging to meet these challenges with new tools, new methods, new approaches to perennial problems. And as these forces converge, they are creating a new operating environment for the public sector, where government can draw from a vast and ever-changing array of technology enablers to address the demands of the moment, anticipating problems before they occur, adapting today's new realities, meeting the needs of citizens with resilient strategies that embrace the full potential of digital enablement. Find out what it takes to bring government into the future.
Good morning and welcome to SID-Washington's first ever virtual conference. I'm Catherine Rafelson, President of SID-Washington. As many of you know, SID-Washington stands for the Society for International Development, Washington Chapter. We are a membership association whose members represent all sectors, including NGOs, for-profit international development companies, the private sector, consulting firms, government agencies, universities, think tanks, and more. And we bring together people from these diverse organizations in varied disciplines and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to discuss important issues and challenges facing the field of international development. We are, in essence, a global town square. This year has certainly been a year of challenges for our community and all communities everywhere. We're grateful to all who supported us through hard times and hope that our programs and activities that bring us together have likewise helped to support many of you. Our annual conference is our largest opportunity for convening our community. This is the first time we've held this conference virtually, which actually gives us the ability to convene a larger audience from all corners of the globe. We welcome all of you and look forward to connecting through our many sessions today and tomorrow. We're a small team at SID-Washington and rely heavily on a fantastic board that helps shape the organization's strategic plan, guide its programming, and connect us with great speakers. Last month, Wade Warren, Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte Consulting and former acting administrator of USAID, took the helm of SID-Washington as our new board chair. I'm pleased to introduce Wade to make brief remarks.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello, everyone. I'm looking forward to chairing the board of SID-Washington and working with my fellow board members who do so much to make the organization successful. I want to welcome you all to our first virtual conference. We're enthusiastic about the coming sessions and are happy that so many of you have been able to join us. You'll hear more from me in a few minutes, but first I want to turn to Roger Ford for remarks. Roger is Managing Director of Accenture Development Partnerships, Accenture's international development practice, where he is overseeing growth and impact through the delivery of more than 1,700 development projects around the world during the past 15 years. Roger also serves as a board member for SID-Washington. We all owe Roger a huge debt of gratitude. Last year, he agreed to chair SID-Washington's annual conference committee. At that point, no one had ever heard of COVID-19. Roger led our organization through a complicated decision process as we transitioned our annual conference to a virtual format, and then guided us all as we embarked on his new adventure. I'm afraid managing the conference has practically turned into a full-time job for him, but Roger, we really wouldn't be here without you. I can't say thank you enough. Let me turn the floor over to you for some opening remarks and for you to tell us about the 2 exciting days ahead of us.
Thank you, Wade. It's certainly been an honor and quite a journey to serve as SID Conference Chair in 2020. When I took on this important board assignment last year, I knew it would be challenging, but I never would have expected to be planning a conference during a global pandemic. Despite having to rethink everything from the conference, from the technical platform to our content to even sponsorship along the way, the disruption and change presented us with a unique opportunity and somewhat of a blank canvas to rethink the features, content, presenters, all from a virtual perspective, and examine new and exciting ways to enhance the program to further benefit the development sector community during these unprecedented times. As such, I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking my fellow board members on the conference committee, and especially Catherine Rae-Fulson, SID-Washington President, for their tireless support of the planning and execution of this year's conference. Our committee this year included Wade Warren, SID-Washington Board Chair and Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte Consulting, Ann Simmons-Benton, SID-Washington Vice Chair and U.S. Delegate to the W20, Ann Huddick, SID-Washington Committee Member and President and CEO of Counterpart International, Mark Johnson, SID-Washington Committee Member and Chief Operating Officer of International Development Services at Tetra Tech, and Carla Koppel, SID-Washington Committee Member and Distinguished Fellow at Georgetown University Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. With equal importance, I would like to thank our fabulous sponsors who make this conference possible, many of whom have continued their support during this extraordinary year. We could not have done it without you. And more importantly, most of our sponsors are also SID-Washington institutional members and are out in the field every single day working to advance the international development agenda and create positive impact around the world. So let's get down to the business and theme of this year's conference, the decade to deliver. When envisioning the theme for this year's conference, we considered several major sector trends underway and honed in on the decade to deliver as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals have created the visibility, platform, and excitement to deliver true progress on most of our most important development challenges around the world. Now in their 5th year, with roughly 10 more to go until 2030, the SDGs present us with a huge opportunity to make significant progress towards achieving sustainable development impact but also provide us with a daily reminder of the challenges that remain ahead in order to realize their full potential and achieve sustainable solutions by 2030. As development leaders, implementers, and advocates of social and environmental change, the SID-Washington community plays a vital role in helping to bring together key sectors of society, including the private sector, nonprofits, governments, and our donors, to drive catalytic change and create the positive momentum required to realize the goals. COVID-19 has already created unparalleled disruption and hardship for many of the world's most vulnerable people, and extreme poverty rates have already increased by 7% this year alone. But fortunately, the negative impacts of COVID-19, particularly on economic development and social systems in developing countries, are almost certain to extend through 2021 and likely well beyond. Now more than ever, we must use this moment as a call to action, join forces as a development community, and collaborate more closely than ever, measuring our results and reporting our impact, and applying continuous innovation through technology and partnerships to ensure we still achieve the vision and objectives laid out by the United Nations. Over the next 2 days of our conference, we look forward to providing interesting and compelling discussion to help bring to life the progress and challenges that lie ahead through the lens of people, planet, and prosperity that form the key pillars of impact and responsibility within the SDGs. You will hear from many leaders, technical and development experts, academics, and SID-Washington members who are working hard to advance this dialogue every single day. Through our conference platform, you will also have the opportunity to ask questions, network virtually, and help us create even a richer collaboration moving forward. Throughout the conference, we will reference and reflect on the SID-Washington SDG membership survey that many of you supported earlier this year, and discuss the ways in which you and your respective organizations can adapt to measure and ensure we are maximizing collaboration to effectively measure and advance the goals. Within our virtual conference format, you should find it easy to navigate across the plenaries and tracks, people, planet, and prosperity, and attend sessions that specifically interest you or that support the work that you are doing in international development. All of our plenary and panel content will be recorded, so in the event you are unable to attend a session because of overlapping sessions or competing priorities, you will have the ability to watch the replays on your own schedule. We are also offering interactive forums to network with our sponsors in the virtual exhibit hall and hear members present compelling lightning talks that bring some of the most important dialogues to life. And please don't forget, we will also be presenting our Innovation Challenge winners on day 2. Finally, I know that virtually all of us personally, as well as our organizations, are facing various degrees of uncertainty about the future and tremendous levels of disruption in our daily lives and routines. During these times, it is important for us as a development community to work together more closely than ever, ensuring that our global development programs and beneficiaries continue to receive the support and assistance that they need every day. The SID-Washington community is known to be resilient, innovative, and resourceful, and we look forward to collaborating through this conference and other programming events during the year to continue to help address and advance our work around the world. With that, I would like to officially kick off our conference with a virtual fireside chat hosted by Wade Warren and Bonnie Glick. As introduced earlier, Wade Warren is SID's new board chair and Deloitte Consulting's Chief Strategy Officer for International Development. Prior to his current role at Deloitte, Wade spent more than 27 years at USAID, serving in a broad range of senior management positions in the bureaus for policy, planning and learning, global health, and Africa, also including serving as the acting administrator for the agency. Wade will be joined by Bonnie Glick, USAID's current deputy administrator. Bonnie was most recently the deputy secretary of the Maryland State Department of Aging, where she was appointed by Governor Larry Hogan. Before joining the Hogan administration, she worked as a senior nonprofit executive, as well as for IBM in a variety of global positions. Wade and Bonnie will now get us started by speaking further about the priorities and challenges facing the international development community during the pandemic and provide some perspectives on the challenges and opportunities ahead in 2021, and further discuss what we must do as a development community to deliver on the goals during the next decade. Over to you, Wade and Bonnie.
Thanks, Roger, for that introduction. And Bonnie, it's so great to see you. You'll remember that a year and a half ago, we did a fireside chat at the last SID-Washington conference, and I have been looking forward ever since then to catching up with you again, although I never imagined that it would be in these circumstances. Anyway, thank you so much for participating and welcome to our conference.
Wade, thank you so much. And full disclosure for people who are viewing remotely, it has been more frequently than just a year and a half ago that you and I have gotten in touch with each other. I have turned to you constantly, I think, as a source of good advice and good guidance as we've hit various milestones along the way at USAID since I've been here. So I've been very grateful to you for your graciousness and for your time, now even more so in your role as the chair of SID-Washington.
Well, thanks. So thanks, Bonnie. So we only have half an hour, so I want to jump right in. There are lots of things that I want to talk to you about, and I want to start, I guess, at the obvious place, which is COVID. I know that USAID has been expending a huge effort on the immediate response, but we also have to keep our eye on the longer term impacts of the pandemic, and all of us who work in development, I think, are worried about the losses that COVID may cause to the progress that's been made over the past decade. So I have a kind of a multi-part question for you about COVID. If you could first talk about, once we get past the response, what do you see as the long-term impacts on developing countries? And then could you also talk a little bit about how the crisis has changed the way we deliver assistance, and if you think there are lessons learned from USAID's perspective on things like virtual delivery and relying more on local actors?
Sure. And I'm just going to take down a couple of notes on your question. It is, of course, the logical place for us to start. And we're hopeful for the day where we've moved beyond the response and we're able to form the next wave of how USAID delivers its assistance around the world. But we're looking at changes just as every enterprise is looking at and adapting to the changed environment that's brought about because of COVID. For us, there are a few major uncertainties that are driving the changes that we're seeing in our approach to delivery of assistance, and they fall into a few buckets. One is the prospects for vaccine development. Another is the full dimensions of what the global economic fallout of COVID-19 will look like. And then I would also say that we should be looking at shifts that we're seeing in governance patterns. So if we look first at vaccines, while everyone focuses on when we'll get a vaccine out there, it's easy to overlook the risk that we have of backsliding on what are considered by now to be standard vaccines, childhood vaccinations. And what we're seeing right now from the data is that an estimated over 110 million children around the world are at risk of missing measles vaccinations. And we've also seen that 24 countries have postponed their immunization campaigns due to COVID. So we're exerting a lot of pressure on our missions around the world to work directly with ministries of health so that we can refocus our attention on the criticality of providing childhood vaccinations so that children are not further exposed to disease. Another area that I mentioned is this economic fallout. We're seeing it in the United States just as we're seeing it all over the world. But in developing countries, we're seeing a hit that's a whole lot harder. This year alone, we predict that over 100 million additional people will be living in extreme poverty, and that an additional 130 plus million people could be pushed into chronic food insecurity. Put on top of that, education needs for children around the world, and this new era of remote learning, which is not really prevalent in a lot of the countries where USAID works, and we're having to adapt and adjust on the fly to provide remote distance learning. Another area that's really important that sometimes gets overlooked is the governance side, the democracy side. What happens when governments are put under pressure? COVID is certainly pressuring government budgets. It's pushing to the limits our efforts at democracy promotion in a lot of countries around the world. We've seen that a full 2/3 of countries that had planned elections have postponed those elections because of COVID-19. And 44 countries we've measured have curtailed free expression in a meaningful way. So these are things that are of great concern to us. We're concerned that women and girls are disproportionately put at risk. During the pandemic, we've seen rates of violence against them that have increased. There's a greater likelihood that women and their earnings will be interrupted as they tend to hold more informal jobs and are in more vulnerable positions financially. So we're concerned about how we focus on marginalized communities, and we're redoubling our efforts to ensure that we can have increased resilience built into the aid delivery systems into marginalized communities. That said, Wade, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more when we start to talk about the digital aspects of aid, but we're looking more and more at how you operate in a remote environment and how both teleworking works, as well as things like remote monitoring in difficult situations that are either dangerous or that are hotspots for COVID-19. How do we monitor and evaluate the work that we're doing? All of these are things that, given our reporting requirements for Congress, we're having to adjust and adapt. We have been incredibly lucky and blessed to have tremendous implementing partners on the NGO and contractor side of the house, many of whom are members of SID-Washington. We're grateful to them for coming up with new and innovative ways to help us monitor the work that they're doing in a way that is transparent both in the form of aid delivery as well as transparent to members of Congress who are closely watching the way that we're responding. They're learning from us, we're learning from them, and we're grateful across the board for our implementing partners.
Thanks. Thank you, Bonnie. If I could put a plug in for another part of the conference. Tomorrow, we're having 2 separate panels with implementing partners to talk about how ways that they have adapted and adopted new methods of delivering assistance. So I encourage people to look at those. I wanted to ask you about the journey to self-reliance. When you and I spoke a year and a half ago, the journey to self-reliance was a relatively new concept. It was just getting underway. And I wanted to ask you now, 18 months later, how is it going as an organizational principle for the agency? And is focusing on self-reliance, has it made a difference in the way USAID is programming, and just in general, how do you measure its success?
So that is a great question. And I have to say, a year and a half, when I was just a baby deputy administrator, a year and a half ago, I talked about the journey to self-reliance, and I kind of kept my fingers crossed that we were doing this the right way. And I will say, Wade, that over the course of time, the vision that Mark Green put forward of a journey to self-reliance is really the only path that USAID can follow with our partner countries around the world so that one day they will no longer rely on international assistance. It's a moral approach to development, and it's what people want. Human beings don't want to be dependent on others, and our goal, as we talked about a year and a half now, is working ourselves out of a job. We know that some countries will become self-reliant sooner than others, but we also know that everyone wants to get there someday. So how have we made this concrete over the course of the last 18 months? Well, the biggest news that I think nearly everyone who's watching is familiar with is that we were able to stand up a new family of bureaus that we refer to as R3, the Relief, Response, and Resilience family. And we had nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate a new role within the agency, the associate administrator for the R3 family of bureaus: humanitarian assistance, conflict prevention and stabilization, and resilience and food security. That new associate administrator is Jenny McGee. She is an extraordinary asset for the agency, and we've been leaning heavily on her to help us advance the mission of R3 as well as the journey to self-reliance. We're proud to be changing as an institution and changing the way that we look at the life cycle of developing countries to go from needing relief to the response that we put into place, and then to resilience in their ability to feed their populations. The next way that we have made real on the promise of the journey to self-reliance has been in your old bureau, PPL, with the country roadmaps. 3 years ago, we issued the first country roadmap or I guess it's technically 2 years ago. We've just issued our third at the end of FY20. So FY18, 19, and 20 country roadmaps have outlined using 18 different metrics the way that countries are demonstrating their capability for development as well as their commitment to development. And one of the things that we've used have been third-party metrics to evaluate countries' levels of commitment and capability. So it's not us drinking our own Kool-Aid, if you will. It's really looking at data and looking at ways that countries are showing where they stand relative to all of the other lower income, middle income, and lower and middle income countries around the world. I think there are over 130 countries that we've evaluated. So it's a useful tool for us, and we rely on it heavily. Not only that, our mission directors, our ambassadors, and our foreign interlocutors around the world are very reliant on the data that we share through the country roadmaps. Countries like to see where they are because then they can gauge where they're going. So that's important for us. And then because we believe that the desire for independence and self-reliance is a universal desire, we've had a lot of success in evangelizing the journey to self-reliance model. And one thing that I'll say that I've seen over and over again is that it stands in stark contrast with the kind of debt and dependency that the PRC offers. And as time passes, we're seeing more and more leaders around the world who are starting to realize this. So we're working hard to ensure the right incentives are in place to strengthen country commitments. And we've accomplished this by building relationships with national governments as well as with local partners. It's done on the basis of shared trust and shared interests. It's in our interest as a nation for countries to become more self-reliant. They make better trading partners, they make better allies, and they're very important for our national security.
That's great, Bonnie. I want to follow up on two things we talked about last time we did a fireside chat. They're both reforms that the agency has undertaken in this administration. One is private sector engagement, and the other is procurement reform. Can you tell us how those two are going, and specifically if you could speak to whether COVID-19 is changing the way that the agency thinks about working with the private sector?
Sure. Look, everyone has had to change and adapt in the way that they are doing business. And we were well on our way when we launched our new private sector engagement policy, with a recognition almost 2 years ago that there was a need for us to reduce our institutional barriers to partnering with the private sector. We need to increase the capacity of our staff in every region of the world and in every sector in which we work to focus on enterprise-driven development. And these efforts, I'm going to say, have been very successful. So what are some of the steps that we've taken to operationalize our private sector engagement strategy? Well, every mission, every operating unit has a private sector engagement action plan. That's a little bit of inside baseball for the audience, but it demonstrates to you all the commitment that we've made for focusing on enhanced and improved and expanded cooperation and collaboration with the private sector. One of the things that the private sector has been extremely adept at, and we are learning from, is how to work remotely. And I guess one of the things I may have neglected when we were talking about Journey to Self-Reliance is exactly that. How do you work in this COVID environment? How do you bring the digital to the actual? And the way that we're all working has to include technologies and R&D that are all taking place in the private sector. And USAID is doing our best to leverage off of the great work that's being done in industry and to incorporate that into our work. This week, we're releasing an updated Global Development Alliance GDA annual program statement with stronger emphasis on direct partnerships with commercial organizations and entities. And it's a much more streamlined expression of interest and concept submission process. So we're looking forward to reaching even more companies and corporations in the private sector with that. We've also worked really closely with the newly launched International Development Finance Corporation. So we were all looking forward to the changeover from OPIC to the DFC, and we have really enhanced the linkages between our missions overseas, our development authority here at USAID that was transferred over to the DFC into what is now referred to as the Mission Transaction Unit at DFC. These are almost all former USAID employees who are working at DFC to create linkages to our missions all over the world. They're working on a current pipeline of opportunities for financing USAID-sponsored transactions. And I understand that we have a pipeline with something like 70 transactions in it, and we're going to mobilize over $1 billion in funding to reach those development objectives. So that's very exciting on the private sector engagement front. On the effective partnering and procurement reform, we've seen a lot of changes over the course of time in ways that are just designed to make partnering with USAID less of a headache. So I know that it's not always easy to contract or receive grants from U.S. government organizations. And we have tried really to take some of the red tape as much as possible of the process out of it while remaining true to the requirements of procurement for acquisitions and for assistance. We've been working, as I'm sure you're all aware, on ways to engage with new and underutilized partners, including local partnerships, new private sector partners, as well as new community and faith-based organizations through the New Partners Initiative. So I think overall, the efforts are in place to streamline as much as possible the opportunities that are available for partnering with the agency. This too is something that through our industry liaison, we've really gotten an awful lot of feedback from both the NGO side as well as the contracting side about ways that we can do this better. We're always looking to make this easier for the partner community, because think about it, it makes it easier for us as well. We want to make sure that our processes are as transparent as possible and that we can move to contract or we can move to grant as expeditiously as possible. So we look forward to hearing more about that. I think you're probably going to have a lot more conversations during the course of the next 2 days on procurement adaptations during the course of COVID.
Absolutely. So I knew 30 minutes would go by way too fast. We have about 10 minutes left, I think. I'm going to try to fit in 2 more questions, maybe, if we can do that. And the next thing that I wanted to ask you about is I wanted to talk a little bit about morale at the agency. And I know from conversations that I have with staff that people are working double time because of the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, everybody is facing the challenges of working remotely. And then not only that, there have been several dispiriting press articles about the agency in recent weeks. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you and the staff are doing.
Thank you. I used to work for Mayor Ed Koch in New York City, and he had a great line. He would just walk around in public and ask people, how are you doing? How are you doing? And how am I doing? How am I doing? It's a question I frequently have asked you, Wade, as a bellwether of what the community thinks. And I've really relied on you for good guidance and good counsel to see how we're doing. I know that we've had to pivot a lot of our programs in light of COVID-19, and we went to full agency telework in March while still being able to maintain our continuity of operations. We set up a task force, and through it we saw teleworking is a big transition, but our employees and our staff have been incredibly resilient in being able to be responsive, as you said, often working double time or crazy time, as I like to refer to it, because people are juggling a lot of different things, whether it's the work-life balance or teaching their children or caring for sick relatives. These are all contributing to the crazy hours that people are working. We've instituted the ability for people to work flexible hours, but there's an awful lot that's going on in people's lives. We're cognizant of it, sensitive to it, and grateful, truly grateful that people have been juggling so capably. I will give a big shout out to our CIO and his team, who really built out for us the tools that we needed in order to operate in maximum telework status, really without skipping a beat. But as I said, the health and safety of our staff is our number one concern. We've seen an enormous uptick in the use of a great program that we have called Staff Care, which puts on webinars and provides all kinds of resources, including counseling for employees. And you mentioned the news coverage, and I'm not going to dodge it. We've been in the press this year, and unfortunately, not for the reasons always that we would like. But I think overall, we look at it, we're in a highly charged environment, and emotions around the world, around the country, around Washington, D.C. are running very high. People are having prolonged absences from the office. And all the while, important national discussions are going on. National discussions about how we respond to the pandemic, national discussions on race and equality. All the while, people are under tremendous tension, juggling. Could we have done things better? Probably. I think everybody around the world is looking for ways to do things better and to do things more effectively and to do things that are in line with what is best for the enterprise. I will point out that we have had some good news over the course of this time of COVID-19, and I don't want that to get lost in all of the more negative press coverage. We have led a multi-billion-dollar effort to respond to COVID globally. We've sent ventilators and technical assistance associated with that. We've provided health services to people all over the world in something like 140 different countries. We've seen our transformation over the course of this time become a reality with the stand up of 4 new bureaus and more to come. And we've done all of this without taking our eye off the ball for 1 second when it comes to navigating the era of great power competition in which we find ourselves now and which will likely last far longer than the outbreak of COVID-19. So it's not all bad news. We recognize that we've taken some lumps and we've been actually incredibly grateful to the partner community for helping to guide us through based on a lot of your experiences, a lot of your best practices, and a lot of your implementations. So I'm grateful to all of you for that.
That's great, Bonnie. That's a very fair answer, and I appreciate it. We have time for one last question, and it's something I think that's kind of near and dear to your heart. So I wanted to end on this. I know that you're very interested in digital technologies and what sort of the digital world means for development. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that. We're having a breakout session tomorrow on the USAID digital strategy, and I know you also published an op-ed in Newsweek last month about the importance of 5G technology to development. So can you just talk about digital technologies a little bit? Do you think the agency has the ability to transform itself around digital technologies? And then also, if you have time, if you could squeeze in a couple of words about Section 889, I think people would be interested in knowing how that is going. And for those of you who are not familiar, Section 889 of the National Defense Authorization Act seeks to protect the United States from surveillance by Chinese telecommunications companies.
Wait, I'm going to talk really fast. Just kidding. You have hit on the thing nearest and dearest to my heart other than my family, and that is digital transformation of USAID. I launched the digital strategy in April, and it was pretty appropriate that I launched it digitally. It was supposed to be a rollout at CSIS in person. We ended up having over 4,000 people tune in to the live stream rollout, and I don't know how many others afterwards. USAID, whether we like it or not, has transformed digitally. And as I mentioned, our CIO and his shop, as well as all of the contractors who have helped us build it out, are largely responsible for that, not just in the normal course of action, but in an ability to pivot as rapidly as they did through the COVID outbreak. As you said, you're going to have a breakout session on our digital strategy, so I'm not going to go into it in too great detail, other than to say that I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done to transform and to take on what I view as a digital first approach to problem solving. If we've seen nothing else during this time, it's that we have to be able to respond using technology and using the technology tools available to us. I'm going to turn to Section 889, which is something, too, that I've been at the forefront of in USAID. It was brought to my attention back in probably February, March, by our contracting community that we were going to hit a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act that would make it very difficult for our implementing partners to address their own supply chains, to address their own technologies around the world, because there are countries in which USAID operates where there are no alternatives available to what are called covered technologies. There are 5 covered technology companies that include the ones that are familiar to all of us now: Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, and some others. USAID agrees with the intent of the NDAA. And we have faithfully implemented it within USAID walls. It's when we get outside USAID walls around the world that we run into problems, particularly in countries where there are no alternatives to the covered technologies. We know our implementing partners are under that same technical difficulty, if you will. And we're working very hard with the White House, with OMB, with Congress to mitigate what I have presented to them as unintended consequences of Section 889 on our ability as a national security agency to meet our objectives. Some of you may have seen the notice from our industry liaison that went out on September 30th, which noted that USAID has received a waiver for telecommunications for internet and phone services through September 30, 2022. Since then, we've also received a waiver for utility and emergency transportation services, also through September 22. We're continuing to work on ways in which we can mitigate some of the threats and vulnerabilities, including upgrading information and communications technology, supply chain risk management. We want to hear from you on this. This process is complex, but it's one that's well worth your time and resources as we're devoting the same to it so that we can protect our country and our partner countries around the world while still being able to deliver life-saving assistance.
Thanks, Bonnie. I know the community especially appreciates your working with us on that question, and the extension of the deadline, I think, is something that everyone welcomes. So I appreciate that. And more generally, I appreciate you so much. Your candor and your willingness to engage with the community is something that we all value. Thank you very much for sitting down with me for this half hour. I wish we had longer, but we'll have to wrap here, and I will talk to you offline later. But now I'm going to pass the responsibility back to Catherine Rafelson, who, as you've heard, is the president of SID-Washington. Catherine, take it from here. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie and Wade, so much. And it was appropriate, Bonnie, that we would end with you talking about technology, because I'm here to explain a little bit of how we're going to do our conference today. This is all just so weird, not being able to be in the same room as you all. But I have to say it's also really cool that we can do this. I want to thank Tech Change for making this possible. We are on a Tech Change platform. And also our other diamond sponsors, Chemonics and Deloitte. Without you and all of our sponsors, we simply wouldn't have been able to pull this off. So thank you. And thank you to all our attendees for embarking on this grand adventure with us. I want to very quickly go over the rest of the agenda and conference features so that you can all take full advantage of what we're offering. But first, I want to mention that we have more than 1,500 people registered and climbing for our conference, representing all corners of the globe. I hope that you have all figured out that you can see who is registered by going to the participants button at the top right of your screen. you'll see a map showing where our attendees are from. And beneath that, you'll see an alphabetical list, which you can actually search on to find people you know or want to know. You can read people's profiles, chat with them, and exchange contact information. So please check out the participants list and make connections, since that's such a big part of what the SID community is all about. If you haven't set up your profile yet, please do so others can find you. You do that by clicking on the circle on the top right of your screen and selecting profile. You can add a photo, your social media information, and more. And you should think of this as your name tag and your business card. We have a number of ways for you to use your profiles to engage with one another, including our networking lounges, which I see that some of you have already discovered. We'll have several rooms available to let you really interact with your fellow attendees, and they'll actually be open all day, and you can go anytime. But at 12 o'clock, we'll have facilitated discussions with our workgroup co-chairs, which you can go to, and you can pop in and out of the different rooms. So we really encourage you to check it out. It should be a lot of fun, and you can find the link for the networking lounges at the top of the agenda. Speaking of which, I hope you've all figured out how to find the agenda. It's the second button in the menu at the top of your screen. And you can find all of our sessions here listed chronologically with speaker information, and you can search on the agenda by typing in keywords in the search bar. You can also RSVP to events to show that you plan to attend and add them to your personal calendar. And I've heard from folks that they really like that feature. So check all that out. So now that you know how to navigate the agenda, let me explain a bit about what's next on the program for today. Our conference chair, Roger Ford, mentioned at the beginning the 5 Ps that shape the SDGs: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. We focused 3 of our breakout tracks on 3 of the Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. We'll have 2 sessions today, one in a few minutes at 11 and one at 1:30, focused on each of these. And then we'll have a 4th track, which is a workshop or learning lab, also with a session at 11 and another at 1:30. Then in between our morning and afternoon breakouts at 12, we'll have the facilitated networking that I mentioned earlier. And then we'll reconvene here on the main stage for a plenary on the next generation of leaders and the SDGs, featuring some extraordinary young professionals who will discuss linking local and global leadership to spur systemic change. This afternoon, after the second round of breakouts, we'll convene again here on the main stage for our closing plenary, which will feature a moderated discussion with Andy Herskowitz, Chief Development Officer of the Development Finance Corporation, and former OPIC President and CEO Rob Mossbacher. And then we'll have remarks from the International Rescue Committee's CEO, David Miliband. So it's a very full afternoon. Throughout the day, our exhibit hall, virtual exhibit hall, will be open with more than 40 exhibitors, and you can get to the exhibit hall from the main menu at the top of your screen. And please check out our ideas library, which is a set of discussion boards that includes all the lightning talks from our lightning talk contest and numerous other topics to get you talking with your fellow attendees. And you can even start your own discussion board. I noticed some people have already done that, which is great. So if you don't see a topic you're looking for, start one. Don't forget our innovation showcase, also in the ideas library. We have 6 finalists there. You can see their entries and vote for best in show. And you can access all of these features after hours too, so please do, especially all of you joining us from other parts of the world where I know it is getting late now. Come back in the morning and check out our exhibits and discussion boards. Also, you get points for your engagement. You may have noticed a number next to your photo at the top right of your screen. Those are your points. For each way in which you engage, attending a session, visiting a booth, posting a comment in the ideas library, you get points. And we'll acknowledge the person with the highest points at the end of the conference. And don't forget tomorrow, I won't go through all the agenda details because I'm sure you know how to do that yourself by now, but I want you to be able to get to the breakouts on time. So do look at tomorrow's agenda. I know that's a lot to absorb. Please try out all the features. Let any of us know if you have any questions. You can find us at the help button on the home page if you scroll down, and also via an email at the top of your screen. Now, our 11 a.m. breakouts are starting shortly, but before you go, we'd like to play the recording of one of the winners of our Lightning Talk contest for you. Please watch Lauren Reese from DAI on Delivering on Diversity, Black Americans in International Development. Thank you.
A few years ago, I was in Liberia reviewing feedback forms from a workshop when I came across a response that stuck with me. A workshop participant had written, "Good workshop, but I had a hard time understanding the white woman facilitator. She spoke too fast." Legitimate feedback, except I was the only woman that facilitated the workshop that day. I was the white woman. As you can probably tell, I am not a white woman. In trying to process this participant's comments, I reflected on colorism and my privilege as a Black woman with light skin. But I also reflected on how this participant's previous experiences in workshops led by international development professionals may have informed their comment. I myself had noticed a trend. The majority of foreign consultants and facilitators, expat staff, and directors of international organizations in Liberia were white. I'm sure this trend was not lost on the workshop participant either. Despite my heritage that I can trace back to West Africa, when in Liberia, I fit more squarely into the category of privileged expat, which is, in our industry, overwhelmingly white. This was a challenging reality to process, as is always the case when grappling with one's privilege. Unfortunately, I did not have anyone to turn to who might help me process this. At the time, I didn't know any Black, non-African women in international development. I didn't know any Black American men either, and that's not okay. But unfortunately, also not surprising. We may be a do-gooder industry, but we still exist in a world of inequality. And as U.S. organizations, we often replicate the inequalities of society around us. International development and aid workers have long gotten the label of white saviors for a reason. And if you look at our senior leadership and employment demographics in our headquarters, it's easy to understand why. One of my favorite quotes is attributed to Desmond Tutu. "There comes a point where we need to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." This quote highlights the importance of addressing systemic factors, the upstream causes, when trying to solve social problems that we see before us, the people in the river. The same systemic approach is required as we aim to address the lack of diversity within our industry, especially when it comes to Black Americans. I like to use the standard entry-level international development job description as an example. These roles typically call for a university degree, MA preferred, some overseas experience, and experience working in a nonprofit. Now, if you assess these requirements in the context of the racial wealth gap in America, you begin to understand how our industry's requirements to entry significantly disadvantage Black Americans. According to a study by the Brookings Institute, the net worth of a typical white American family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family. The gap in wealth is connected with a long history of systemic racial discrimination in housing policies and access to financing, and is also a central reason why Black Americans are more likely to take out loans to attend college. The U.S. Department of Education data reveals that within 6 years of starting college, 1/3 of all Black students who have taken out loans and have entered repayment default on their loans. This is compared to just 13% of their white peers. Further, Black college graduates earn less than their white counterparts with the same educational level, which speaks to implicit bias and pay inequalities within the workforce, reinforcing the wealth gap. These systemic inequalities not only disproportionately impact Black Americans' ability to access higher education, which is necessary to get a CV reviewed by our recruiters. These factors contribute to some Black Americans' inability to afford to take unpaid internship, volunteer overseas, and even take a lower paid entry-level job in nonprofit to get the experience needed to work in our sector. In international development, we pride ourselves on evidence-based decision-making, and if breaking into our industry is predicated on one's ability to self-fund an unpaid internship or volunteer abroad, the statistics tell us that they are disadvantaging Black Americans in the process. I'm sharing this information about Black Americans not only because I'm Black American. I'm sharing this information because it was the systemic racism and repeated murders of Black Americans that contributed to the current diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism efforts within your organizations and this conference as well. Despite the current awakening, advocacy and organizing around inequality and international development has long been underway in many of the countries in which we work. So in the coming decade, I hope international development organizations not only focus on delivering for Black and Brown communities abroad, but also take ownership of their role in reinforcing systemic inequalities and strive to deliver on behalf of the Black and Brown communities in their home countries and headquarters.